What's up everybody, it's your boy Nate. So most of you know that I love motion graphics and I'd like to think that I'm relatively decent, which is why a lot of you have been subscribing to us here on YouTube. But I wasn't always as good. In fact, I still remember when I was 10 years old and just aimlessly knocking about trying to develop a style. My logo animations were hardly more than physics simulations. Honestly, I just had no idea what to do. Shit, I still hardly know what to do, but at least I have some grounding principles that help me no matter what it is whenever I'm animating or doing anything in motion graphics. So for all of those who have been sending a comment or a DM saying, Nate, chill out on all the K-pop edits, glow animations, lightsabers, fire and hand shit, all that's cool and all, but it's VFX and we want you to talk about the wonderful world of motion design. So that's exactly what we're doing today. I'm gonna show you the tips and tricks and the grounding principles that are gonna help you get started in doing motion design using After Effects. I'm excited, I know you are too. All right, let's go. Okay, so many centuries ago when I was first learning how to do motion design, I remember just struggling so much because I would literally spend hours looking at all of my idols and just getting frustrated because they were making so many dope ass videos and all of my videos just look like ass. But over the time, I've learned a whole lot from them and there's a lot of cool things that now I'm able to apply to my work and make me feel a little bit more confident about whenever I'm animating something like a logo or a lower third or just pretty much anything in After Effects. These are the things that I come back to time and time again to just help me get my footing. And that's exactly what we're gonna explore today. So I'm gonna break this down into 5 tips and techniques that are just absolutely essential for you when you're learning motion design. Okay, so first black mixture technique that I'm gonna talk to you about is probably the first thing that you're gonna do before you animate anything in After Effects. And that is compile some reference footage, make a mood board, a style guide, whatever it is that's gonna be your framework for what it is that you wanna animate. Once you get a little bit more grounded, I'm sure that you can freestyle your edits and make all kinds of cool, crazy shit. I still freestyle edits all the time, but when I was first starting, my freestyle edits looked all over the place, and it wasn't until I had a solid bank of reference material that really helped me define what style that I was gonna be going with moving forward and animating. It's really hard to find your footing when you're just always freestyling it. Most of you know that I love doing VFX and motion graphics that look like this, but my reference and my earliest footage that I would study actually came from Hayao Miyazaki. If you take a look at this scene right here, you might not see the direct comparisons between my work and Hayao Miyazaki's, but this was a scene that just absolutely stuck with me because of the way that he was able to use expressive movements and really define the interactions between the character in the scene and the environment and create all kinds of really cool motions in between those keyframes. So I would sit back and watch this frame by frame. And if you have a movie or a scene that you just absolutely love, I highly recommend that you sit down, look at it frame by frame, because there's all these little details that an animator will put into their work. 24 frames in a second, 60 frames in a second, just happens like that. And it's really hard to be able to pinpoint those things unless you go back and play it at maybe 0.25% speed like you can do here on YouTube, or actually download the video clip, put it into After Effects, and then just go frame by frame so you can see exactly what's going on. What you're gonna realize is that a lot of the really fluid movements come from a very conscious decision-making process. In fact, even some editors will do things like cutting between clips and making movements faster or slower just to create a certain sense of motion and flow that feels comfortable for what they're trying to convey. And once you notice those techniques, you can then borrow them for whatever it is that you're animating as well. Eventually, after having enough resources, you're gonna have a whole bank of heroes that are pretty much guiding what will eventually become your style. It's not gonna look like theirs because, you know, Miyazaki mixed with Edward O.V, mixed with Beeple, mixed with Freddie Wong, mixed with Corridor Digital, mixed with Video Copilot, all of those is what defines my style. But that's just because I really love their work and I studied it a lot. And I would look at just things frame by frame to really get a sense of what it is that I loved about it. And that way, when I went to go animating something of my own, I would be able to say, hey, maybe I want to add that to my video as well. Now, if you're one of the billion people that have heard of Disney and at least seen one Disney movie, you probably know that their animation quality is just top notch, but you might not know that a lot of the animation actually comes from reference footage. So you can look as far back as this film that was done in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and actually see that they had real actors dancing, and then an animator would go ahead ahead and look at this reference footage and be able to draw over it or use this as pretty much a guide for whenever making movements, and then taking some liberties of their own and making certain things more exaggerated, or maybe downplaying certain moments of it, manipulating the time of it, essentially to create something that looks fluid and lifelike, but also has a little bit of the motion designer's expression put on it as well. So yeah, pretty easy, right? If you want to make cool shit, study cool shit, and then your shit will be awesome. All right, I've like definitely hit my shit limit for this video. So here's what my mood board for this projection mapping piece looked like. As you can see, there's a lot of things playing around with it in terms of color and composition. And the idea behind this projection mapping piece was being able to experience music in a physical way. So not only having the audio playing in your ear, but having the visuals react and respond in a way that makes you feel like you're traveling through sound. And some of the best artists that I find that experiment with this translation between mediums are people like James Turrell, who is a huge influence for this. Literally Beeple as well, because he makes dope stuff all the time and really knows how to play around with color and composition. Also, I really love the work from Elastic. They did amazing stuff on the MTV. The style of this projection mapping piece ultimately came from these reference footage, and by combining all those things together, we get this end result. Now, a lot of you have been saying how much you love the intro that we have here on the channel. You guys have been asking me to talk about it for a while. There's a lot of references that went into making this, but hands down, one of my favorite references, a huge inspiration, this Apple commercial, which actually borrowed from this Hyundai commercial, and this Edward OV IG post, which looks really similar to this Elastic post as well. As you can see, when you start to study some of your greats or some of your favorites, you're gonna find that they're also borrowing some really cool concepts from their favorites as well. That's what motion design is all about, just standing on top of the shoulders of giants and making really cool shit. That was a Leonardo da Vinci quote, by the way. At least I think it was. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, style guides, mood boards, reference footage, whatever it is that you want to call it. I can't stress to you enough how important it is and how much it's going to help you whenever you have to design something from scratch. And for that reason, it gets a well-earned Black Mixture stamp of approval. Ooh, okay, so number 2, the next black mixture technique that I'm gonna talk to you about is actually super easy. It's probably the easiest things to do in After Effects, and yet I'm surprised to see that not a lot of people know how to do this. And actually it took me years to figure out how to do this in After Effects. That's right, I'm talking about motion blur. Now, if you are a gamer or have played video games before, you probably know that graphics look so much more impressive with motion blur. It's pretty much in every video game that comes out nowadays. But what you might not know is that you can actually enable motion blur right within After Effects and use it on just about anything that you're creating. So in order to enable motion blur, all you have to do is click on this little icon right here. Looks like 2 circles together, and then you can go ahead and hit play and get super frustrated and realize, why the f is my motion blur not working? But before you freak out all the way, you might want to also take a look at this little icon right here, which is right above the timeline, and click on that, which is going to actually enable motion blur in your composition. I don't know why After Effects does it so weird like this, where you have to click 2 buttons, and honestly you might get a little confused sometimes, but there is a very good reason for it, and it's actually because motion blur slows down your computer so much more than a lot of other things in After Effects, and Adobe made it really easy to just turn it off for the entire composition. So that's what this second button is. Whenever you have it enabled now, when we go to preview, it's gonna show the motion blur truly how it would come out in the render. If you don't have this enabled, you might not see any motion blur until you actually export through the render queue. So just a little thing to keep in mind. So before you rage quit and think Adobe After Effects is just broken, click the second button and test it out for yourself and see that it actually does work. Now, motion blur isn't something that you have to apply to everything. In fact, there is a style based around not using motion blur, having more choppy animations. I do a lot of that for Vox style like videos, which you can see right here, in which this one doesn't even work in 24 frames per second, it works in 12 frames per second. Oh my goodness, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about frame rate later. Anyways, motion blur, I love it a lot. Don't overdo it, but it can also make your stuff look really cool and a lot more fluid and give you some variance in your footage. So for that reason, it gets a well-earned Black Mixture stamp of approval. Okay, so number 3 on the list, this next Black Mixture technique is probably the most important technique that I'm going to talk about on this list. Motion blur is cool and all, reference footage is cool and all, but the one thing that I think about whenever I look at an animation or something from a motion designer, entirely dependent on this next technique that I'm going to talk to you about, the animation curve editor or the graph editor. Some people call it the animation graph editor. Adobe does actually. I like to call it the animation curve editor or speed editor because that's really the parts that I adjust in there the most. This technique is so important. I recommend that you slap it on to just about anything that you make in After Effects. because not only does it make a huge difference in your animation, it's probably the one defining quality that separates amateurs from experts. So by default, your keyframes are gonna have what's known as linear interpolation, which is just a super fancy way to say that every point in between your two keyframes is gonna be even and look super straight, basically have no variance in it. It's just, yeah, it's gonna look like this, all right? If this makes no sense to you at all, just take a look at these two animations. The one on the left and the right are actually the same amount of keyframes. They both happen in the same amount of time, and the keyframes are exactly the same. But as you can tell, one has a little bit more of a robotic, straightforward movement, while the other one has a lot more expression to it. It has a little bounce to it, has a little groove to it, whatever you want to call it. And all of that is because of the animation curve editor. This left one looks kind of robotic, kind of plain. That is called linear interpolation. And this right one that has a little bit more bounce to it actually has a curve that I'm going to show you in a second. So the reason why this technique is so important is because kind of actually feeds back into reference footage, but basically nothing in life has an exactly linear interpolation. That's why when you do things with a linear interpolation, it comes off a little bit robotic, computer generated feeling, which works really great for doing things like HUD elements or graphics that you want to have a little bit more of a computery vibe. Whereas everything else that happens in the natural world has what is known as a Bezier interpolation. That means everything from gravity to soft body dynamics to walk cycles to just anything naturally moving, it's gonna have a Bezier to it. All those people back in high school saying that calculus was useless, they're kind of right. But if you want to feel like an extra geek, you can just go ahead and say that you use calculus to animate, because calculus is just the study of change. And when you're a motion designer, all you're doing is changing shit. So yeah, I'm gonna show you how to add a little bit of personality to your keyframes using the curve editor. Let's take a look at these two keyframes that we have here. And this diamond shape shows that they actually are linear interpolated. Now we're gonna go ahead and click on this icon right here, which looks like a graph. And this is gonna pull up the animation graph editor. I'm gonna right click in this window and change it to speed, because that's what I wanna affect. I don't wanna change where these are going and what points they're moving to. I wanna change how fast they move to those points and how fast they slow down. How fast they slow down. Like, what the fuck? I like the beginning and end in terms of keyframe position, but I don't like how the speed graph is entirely linear. It looks like this. So let's go ahead and change it. All I'm gonna do in order to change it is click these handles and drag them out, and you're gonna see a hump form. And for one of my favorite curves, I'm gonna want the hump to happen more in the middle, be super exaggerated up. And what this is gonna mean is that the animation is gonna start off slow, speed up to a maximum velocity, and then slow back down again. And the reason why I love this one so much is because just about everything in the natural world has this sort of slow build up, max velocity, and slow down. You can try it out for yourself. Just go ahead and like punch the air. And as you can see, your hand is gonna start slow, speed up to a max velocity, pop out, and then come back in. The way that I learned this was from studying stick figure animations. I used to just love this shit from Turquoise. It looks so amazing and so fluid. And the really cool part about it is that there weren't that many details because of stick figure animations. Frame by frame, there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in terms of the way that movements are speeding up and slowing down. And that's why it feels so lifelike and fluid. So whenever we make a curve that looks like this, we're essentially mimicking reality and the natural movement of things. Now, there are also times that linear interpolation is really important as well. So I like to do this for things that look a little bit more robotic or maybe even a little choppier, because that is a style in itself as well. So there's not a one perfect way. There's a whole lot of different curves that you can do and play around with. I definitely like to switch it up for certain elements and really fine tune things and make sure that every element is conveying, not just moving to a certain point at a certain time, but is actually speeding up and slowing down relative to how I want it to communicate that motion. Definitely play around with it, have fun with it, because that's what animating is all about. And the animation curve editor is just one of the most important tools to start to have fun with After Effects and really fine tune your animations. And for that reason, it gets a well-deserved Black Mixture stamp of approval. Ooh, okay, so now we are getting down to number 4 on this list. And before I go any deeper, I want to let you guys know that this list is in no way in order of importance. These are just techniques that I found to help me when I start to do motion design. But definitely go out, experiment for yourself. And hey, if you come up with something super dope that I just didn't talk about, please leave a comment down below, because I'm sure that everyone else is gonna love reading it. And I know I will too. Let's get back into this list. Ooh, okay, so number 4, this is the next black mixture technique that I'm gonna talk to you about, and that is composition. Composition isn't just something that is important for graphic design or photography and filmmaking. It's something that is important for motion design, because not only do we care about how fast things move, we care about where they are in relation to each other and ultimately the balance of things. So this comes definitely in handy when you're animating things like a logo or a lower third. And you wanna make sure that you're communicating as best as possible. Here is a super old video I did way back for Chriselle on Valentine's Day, which is a typography video before people even call these lyric videos. It's to this Bruno Mars song. And even though my style is like all over the place back then, I'm happy that I did one technique that really helped ground the whole piece, which is have this 3D camera consistently frame the lyrics as they come onto the screen. And all that means is that I wanted to make sure that you could read the lyric in the center of the frame as easily as possible. Now, it's not a super crazy composition-wise setup, but without this element, the animations would be much more difficult to understand. And yeah, in order to do this, all I did was click on this button right down here, which is in the composition viewer, and make sure that I have the safe margins and smart guides selected, which is just gonna make your life so much easier. Now, if you haven't seen anything like safe margins before, they're a bit archaic in that people used to use them a lot for things like television and making sure that when people were viewing stuff on different monitors, that everything was still legible and would fit inside of the space. So that's what these boxes are. The outer box is gonna be called your action safe, and then the inner box is your title safe. And what action safe means is that if you want somebody to see an action or a movement or something, make sure that it just happens within this box, because anything outside of that might get a little bit difficult to understand. And then same with your titles. The title safe box just means make sure you have any text that you want people to understand inside of this title safe box. Now, I do know that new media has allowed for things like different title and action safe requirements, so it's not necessarily people aren't going to be able to see what it is if it's outside of these guides, but it is going to make your things look a little bit more balanced whenever you adhere to these guidelines. So I can't stress to you enough how important composition is. It's really useful, and for that reason, it gets a well-earned Black Mixture stamp of approval. Ooh, okay, so the last technique that I'm gonna talk to you about, it's a little bit more advanced for the beginner, but it is gonna change your life and make things so much easier. In fact, I made a whole video on it a little bit ago, and that is expressions and plugins. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do in After Effects that are ultimately not possible to do. So if you're a little rusty, don't worry, because you don't have to know too much. There's actually probably just about 5 that I always use inside of my projects, and that's why we have the top 5 expressions for After Effects. Of course, there's a whole lot more in terms of coding, but if you can imagine that a lot of animation first started off just by being hand drawn, there's a lot of other stuff that can be done. If you were to try it by hand, you would probably have your fingers fall off the limbs because of exhaustion, and honestly, there's stuff that's just straight up not even possible to do by hand. We're going to be able to use code to make our lives a lot easier. And that's all expressions is, using code to animate. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool motion design principles built into After Effects, things like squeeze and ease and stretch and bounce and duplications and offsets. All of those can be handled through expressions, making your life a whole lot easier. I'm gonna show you a quick example right now. So here's an animation I have. Let's say I wanna animate all of these elements on screen. Now I could either go through one by one, set a keyframe for each of them, and honestly, this would take forever to do things like the bouncing of them or even the easing from keyframes and whatnot. Opening the animation curve editor for everything would just take forever. And so what instead I like to do is use expressions to save me a whole lot of time. In fact, I really love to use this plugin or presets of animations, which kind of goes hand in hand with the expressions, because most of those just operate on expressions that you don't have to remember. You can just one-click touch. So one of my favorite packs is the A-Juice animation presets. And then also, if you don't have the money to spend for that, you can get a more basic version. All of those things are going to save you a lot of time and only requires a little bit of effort. Pretty impressive, right? Can't recommend it enough. Make sure you go ahead and check that out. Expressions literally changed the game for me, and I'm sure they will for you too. And for that reason, they get a well-earned Black Mixture stamp of approval. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back, because you just sat through learning the ins and outs of motion design. Now there's a lot more that we can touch on in terms of animation and motion graphics with After Effects, but hopefully these are things that you can apply to your own work and make really dope stuff right off the bat, no matter what it is. Now I want to know what you guys think. Was this helpful? Do you guys want to learn anything else about motion graphics? Do you guys want me to break down a project file? You guys want me to send you project files? Just leave a comment down below. We love reading reading the comments. If you have not subscribed already, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we're gonna be talking about all kinds of cool stuff, from motion graphics to VFX to filmmaking to Spark AR. We really just touch a lot of cool things for creatives. And honestly, it's such an honor to have a community like you guys who are super talented. You guys always blow me away by sending me a cool DM of something that you made from watching the tutorials, or something that you want me to check out because you think I could do a cool tutorial on it. So yeah, keep it coming. We love it, guys. And as always, I hope to catch you on the next one. Peace. Yo, I should go on TikTok, huh?
Yeah.